We'll give everybody one more minute and then we'll start. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. As you note, this presentation is being recorded and it will be placed on our website after it is completed. So look for that if you have any questions and want to look back at the presentation. So this is the SB 823 Youth Programs and Facilities Grant Program, Grantee Orientation. Thank you very much for everyone for being here. And we will have Q&A throughout the presentation as well. Go to the next slide here. The agenda for today is we're going to go over briefly an overview of the Bscc and the grant program. We'll go over the fiscal responsibilities and the administrative responsibilities as well. And like I said, we will have Q&A throughout, and there will be a public comment period at the end for anybody that is joining for the public that is not associated with a grantee. And Bao, I'll hand it over to Bao to kind of go over how to do the Q&A portion of this presentation.
Okay, so thanks, John. So for the Q&A portion, we will be using the raise hand feature instead of the chat function. So the raise hand feature, it can be found in two different locations depending on which version you have. So at the bottom of your Zoom window, there should be a reactions button. If you click that, there should be a raise hand function underneath the emojis. If it's not there, you could click on the participants button, and then it should be on the bottom right of that box. And then let me pull up an image for you. Okay, so if you click the participants here, the raise hand should be on the bottom right, or it should be right here under the reactions.
We're not seeing that, Val.
Oh, you're not seeing it? Okay. Can you see it now? The Excel sheet?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, if you click participants, it should be on the bottom right here, the raise hand, or it will be under the reactions section here. Okay. Okay, so during the Q&A, we'll stop 3 times, like John said. When it's time for the Q&A, you guys will raise your hands. Then we will call on you and ask you to unmute yourselves. You'll ask your questions and then put yourself back on mute. Okay. All right. And then if we don't reach all of your questions during the slide, or you have questions afterwards, you can email your questions to sb823grant@bscc.ca.gov. That email will be on our slides later, and the slides will be posted to the website. And then we'll also be posting an FAQ to our website as well. Okay, back to you, John.
All right. So now we'll go ahead and get into the rest of the presentation. We have the staff Kathleen Howard is the executive director. I am John Prince, deputy director. Our general counsel is Aaron McGuire. I don't believe either of them, Kathleen or Aaron, are on right now. And for the rest of the staff, we have field representatives, Michael Shores and Tanya Parker Mashburn, and they will reach out to each of the counties after this presentation, either today or tomorrow, letting you know who is the field representative for this project, so that you know who your point of contact is. We also have the manager of the program, Ryan Akamura, and we have analysts Sharon Coleman, Lindsay Tu, and Bao Fan. All right, the CFC division is where this grant is being housed, and the CFC division works in collaboration with the state and local government agencies, administrating the financing for local adult and juvenile criminal justice facilities, as well as juvenile detention facility projects throughout the state. So many of you have SB 81 facilities that you have worked with, and so that was also through us as well. A little background on SB 823, just to get everybody up to speed, just in case you're coming into this new. It was signed in September 30th of 2020 by the governor. Part of the SB 823 bill allocated $9.6 million to the Bscc to award the one-time grants to counties for the purpose of providing resources for infrastructure-related needs and improvements to assist counties in the development of a local continuum of care. In November, the board formed a working group and developed a request for information, which solicited counties' information as to what this project might look like, what types of items counties might need as well, and all that information was back to us in December. In February, the board approved an RFA for development, and we reached out and sought stakeholder input multiple ways, and you can see, I believe, some of that information is on our website as well. If you go back to our board meeting that took place in the April board meeting, you can see some of this additional information as well as on the February board meeting. Had a summary of some of that comments. Let's see, in April is when the RFA was approved along with the scoring panel. The applications came in May, and the board approved the considerations at the June board meeting, and thus we have the new awards that are out to all of you counties. Just for your reference, this is a list of who was on the scoring panel. So there is a representative of a broad array of stakeholders. So the response to the RFA, we received 40 applications. We received for Part A, the regional hubs, we received 3 from El Dorado, Fresno, and Sonoma. And Part B, we received 37 applications, 17 small counties, 14 medium counties, and 6 large counties, with a total of $5.8 million requested. After that time, El Dorado County has since relinquished those funds, so that's you'll see here in a little bit that those funds actually have gone up beyond what was in the RFA. So this is a list of the counties, just so you have reference, and always feel free to reach out to your other county partners for any questions as well, or any things that they might be doing. They might have some innovative ideas when you're developing your new proposal for the budget modifications that we'll talk about later. This is where the current dollars sit for small counties, medium counties, and large counties. You see that in bold there. So when you're looking at your budgets, this number that is listed below is where you should be targeting your new budgets for small, medium, and large counties. And again, we'll talk about how to do the budget augmentation in a little bit here. So with that, before we get into the actual financial obligations and reporting obligations and administrative pieces, is there any questions on the grant process as a whole? Remember, go ahead and use that raise your hand feature if you have any questions. All right, doesn't look like we have anything, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next section.
Thank you, John. Melissa, Allen, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand raised.
Oh, let's.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to confirm, did I just see that that the revised budgets are due December 10th, 2021 for the increased amount for the Part B?
That's correct. Yes, we were requesting that you submit it no later than December 10th of 2021.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and I also see a question from Daniel Hernandez. Go ahead, Daniel, unmute yourself.
Hi, just kind of, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a general question. In the introduction to the original solicitation, there was mention of infrastructure, programs, and services. And then later on in the detailed instructions, programs and services was omitted, and it would focus solely on infrastructure. So our contracts folks advised us to not include programs and services contracts in our application. Can you clarify that?
So the purpose of that is that they're not supposed to be ongoing costs associated with those. If they're one-time startup, those are considered infrastructure. So if you need to send someone off for training, you need to purchase some sort of module or something like that for programming, that's okay. It's the issue with saying that the dollars are for actual programming is that generally that's staffing costs that are associated with that, and those staffing costs only have a 25% allowance of the total grant award. So you really would have to figure out how to do that with those, and so that's kind of why that limit was put in there.
So one-time training costs, like training for trainer type of situations, would be okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question from Juan Cubas. Please unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Juan Cubas, Los Angeles County Probation Department. Quick question. I just wanna confirm that you stated that the revised budget that would outline the new allocation, it's due December 10th, 2021.
That is the latest date, yes. If you can get it to us sooner, that would be great, so that we can make sure we have no issues getting the funding through and authorized.
So just to follow up, so that means that when we receive the standard agreement, it would be based on the original budget amount that we have, or will it be based on the revised budget amount?
So we will not issue the standard agreement until we receive the revised budget. So if the county or any county chooses to keep the funding that was originally requested in the RFA, and you're not going to make any modifications to the budget and or the items that you requested, then we can go ahead and start up with the standard agreement. It would be at that original amount. But if you're going to make changes to the budget to increase the allocation, we request that we have that so that we can get the standard agreement and have that in place with the correct dollar amount. So the sooner that that we get those, then the sooner we can have that standard agreement in place. But the standard agreements will be dated as of the June 10th or June 11th. I'm not sure, Ryan, you have to check me on that. That will be the date that the standard agreement will start.
Yes, and it was June 10th.
Okay, great, noted. Thank you. And just a follow-up quick question, because we're currently working right now with our board on trying to get the approved resolution in. In most cases, when we have grants awarded of this nature, we usually attach the actual grant agreement with our request of approval of our resolution. So that means in this case, we wouldn't have that in order to get the, we wouldn't have the agreement ready in time in order to get the resolution approved, correct?
Correct, but there is a draft form of document that is on our website as well, so that you can take that to the board so they can see what the agreement would look like, and it would just be plugging in the numbers and county information into those.
Similar, I see, great, noted. Thank you so much, appreciate the answer.
Okay, next question is from Jennifer Kaufman.
Hi, good morning. I actually have two questions. One is that you mentioned SB 81, and so if our SB 81 facility was designed for a lower risk population, but the Juvenile Justice Realignment Block Grant Group is recommending to move kids to that facility, does the plan, the SB 81 plan, have to be revised, or will the SB 823 plan supersede that? And who would be responsible then for overseeing any modifications to make sure that they're Title 24 and Title 15 compliant?
So for those modifications, you're going to work with your FSO field rep, and they will check those. They're going to be looking at those proposals. So any changes that are requested to the SB 81 facility for that purpose will need to go through your FSO field rep, which is already assigned, and I believe on our website they have a list of them as well by county. So if anybody doesn't know who your FSO field rep is, it is listed there as well.
And then the second question was related to the group that is making the decision. So I think in our county, they are allowing the group to determine which facility that the SB 823, not just the infrastructure, but also the programming should be located. Was that the intent of the legislation, or other counties? Because I've heard that other counties are making those decisions since we're the ones applying for the grant and not the group.
I think we're talking about two different pieces of 823. This is the $9.6 million piece, so it's slightly different than the amount that you're talking about in the programming that you're speaking of, which is the other piece of the 823. So they are running on separate tracks. They should be, I would assume, be informed of the 823 grant funding that you're going to receive, so that they can incorporate that into any programming that you would have. But I can't say specifically how each county is going to run those, whether it's going through that group or if it's going to be probation that's going to look at that individually. That's going to be, I think, county by county, and it's going to be determined by them as well.
Yeah, so to follow up on that, I totally understand the difference, but we're having a problem writing up with, the amount that has been awarded because the facility hasn't been solidified. So that's one issue. And then secondly, what happens then if you decide on a facility and you indicate you're going to spend it on, whatever the case may be, but then our field representative says that's not going to align with the supervision, what's needed for supervision for the facility.
Yeah, in that case, we can continue to do any modifications that might need to happen. So you're not necessarily 100% stuck with what you come up with on the budget modification. Again, like you say, if the FSO field rep looks at that and says, that's not going to work for this type of facility, you need to have them at, a different facility. That's something that we will definitely work with them as well. And so then we would make a modification at that time. In order to get the grant agreement, we need to have your initial budget modification that shows what funds are going to be used where. But there are opportunities later on to do another budget modification if necessary in that type of case that you mentioned.
Okay, and sorry, because it's just triggering more questions for me. So, so again, it sounds like we're putting the cart before the horse, because if the field rep comes back then and says, no, that won't work with this facility and the design, and the decisions and all of that have already been made and gone to our board, then that's going to be problematic. So is there any type of training or outline of what is required for that type of facility that is going to be needed as part of the infrastructure?
I would say if you're looking at putting this infrastructure inside one of your existing facilities, to be working with your FSO field rep while you're making your budget modification to run those items by. You should be able to, depending on the amount of funding and what you're planning on doing, have a conversation with them to get a kind of a cursory review of what it is you're planning on doing to get you know, them to say, yeah, that should be fine. You know, we might have to look at it in more detail or what have you, or they might be able to say, no, there's no way that's going to work. So definitely work with them while you're developing these budgets as well, to make sure that there's no issues. And if you are having trouble with getting in touch with your FSO field rep, you can also reach out to the field reps that I listed at the top of this presentation as well.
Val, do we have any other questions?
We have no more questions. We're okay to move on.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, thank you, John, and thank you, Val. Again, my name is Ryan Okamura, and I'm the manager within the CFC division. So now we'll go into the fiscal responsibilities of the counties, and this will include the budget modification process and submission of your invoice workbook, which will allow you to be reimbursed. So again, we'll be discussing how to locate and save the invoice workbook, instructions for submitting invoices and budget modifications, as well as required supporting documentation for invoices. So here's a screenshot of the Bscc homepage. So now I'll kind of just walk you through where to locate the invoice workbook, as well as the additional resources that we posted this week. So if you click on the construction icon, which is highlighted in red, that'll take you to our Bscc CFC homepage. So once you get on our homepage, you'll locate and expand the Youth Programs and Facilities Grant Program tab by clicking on the plus sign on the right side of the screen. Then you want to click on the blue homepage button or link. Next slide. From there, if you scroll down, you'll notice a resources section, and here's where you can locate Part A or Part B of the invoice workbooks. And then here, once you locate the Excel workbooks, to save it, basically you would just right click on the file, select Save Link As, and then just save it to your desktop. From there, you can add the county name to the end of the file, and then from there, you can exit the browser and work offline on your desktop. And just to note, the subsequent workbooks will be provided by Bscc after submission of your first submittal. That way, we go ahead and lock down previous invoices, so those numbers can't be changed. Next slide. So this is what the Bscc TO1 form looks like. Within the grant agreement, there's a timeline that defines each quarterly invoice period, as well as the corresponding due date. And we'll be reviewing that slide shortly. So before we jump into the invoice, I wanted to go over the budget modification process. So this is what the mod request form looks like. You can access this form by selecting the tab titled Modification Request in the invoice workbook. You'll enter data into the yellow shaded fields. All counties will be required to submit a mod request due to the increase in funding made available at the June 10th Bscc board meeting, as well as the recent relinquishment of the Part A county. So even if you submitted an updated budget, everybody will still be required to submit a mod request. So the current budget section will be the figure submitted in your initial RFA, and the changes column will represent the increase in grant funding. So please submit your updated budget Excel table when submitting your budget mod request, so my staff can easily identify the overall grant funds and county cash contributions, if any, for your projects. Now the budget Excel table that I'm referring to is the one that you are already familiar with, the one that you included with your initial RFA submittal. Also, if a significant amount of additional funds should become available, we'll let you know if an additional mod request will be needed. Next slide, Val. So the mod form allows the grantee to do one of two things. The first thing is to make a change within a line item that modifies the grant project narrative, but does not change the dollar figure of those line items. Or number two, modify the budget by moving funds from one line item to another, or in our case, if there's an increase in grant funds available. So this tab, so the grantee shall identify the mod budget number by selecting the next number in sequential order, 1 if it's the first, and then identify on which invoice the modification becomes effective. If more than one budget mod is needed, please reach out to Bscc and we'll add a tab to the workbook to get things started. Next slide. So quick note, when filling out the changes column, this will also include any county cash contributions of the project, if any. You will explain the breakdown between grant funds versus county cash contributions in the justification section, which is shown on the next slide. In this section of the mod form, explain why the change is necessary. This section should never be left blank. For budget mods, you must list the affected line items, detail how the original budget narrative has changed, and explain why the change was necessary. Next slide, Val. So this slide outlines the process of county approvals before submitting invoices or budget mods. This area is located at the bottom of the invoice workbook or budget mod tab. The authorized financial officer is identified in the grant agreement and RFA. The authorized financial officer cannot be the project director or the person preparing the invoice. Please be sure to fill out all the green shaded areas before submitting. Next slide. So the person preparing the form fills out the information on the left side of the screen before forwarding to the authorized financial officer for final review. The authorized financial officer should check the certified box at the bottom of the invoice after reviewing and reading the above statement. So once you complete that and you get the proper approvals, once the budget mod or invoice is approved and certified by the county, the authorized financial officer will email the Excel invoice workbook to Bscc. The authorized financial officer is the only authorized individual to submit an invoice to us. And they want you guys wanted to submit the invoice to the SB 823 grant at bscc.ca.gov address. And now Sharon will go over the invoice workbook.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everybody. Are you ready to learn all kinds of information you never wanted to know about your invoice? Let's get busy. All right, this first issue, the first image that you're seeing here is a view of the upper portion of the invoice workbook, and all of the tabs are outlined in red on the bottom. Each financial invoice has a separate work tab titled with the invoice number, and it's 1 through 12. In addition to the invoice tabs, the other tabs in the workbook are instructions, budget modification request form, and the project budget narrative. This is located in your invoice workbook is located in the resource section of the 823 homepage. Please get yourself very, very acquainted with all that's in that resource section, because this is where you'll find all of our documents and instructions. Thank you. The invoice workbook. This is the top portion of invoice number 1, which is the only invoice where you will have access to enter the budget table. The portion outlined in red is the section you will be filling out with your approved budget table. Please round to the whole dollar. If you are a Part B grantee and the budget modification is not yet approved, you can use the RFA budget table for the purposes of submitting invoice number 1 no later than its due date. If you are a Part A grantee, a budget modification should not be necessary, and you may use the RFA budget table for that first invoice. Once the budget is entered and you submit to Bscc, this section that's in red right now will be locked down. Every invoice must be submitted no later than the due date, whether you have any claim or not. Just a friendly reminder, if the accounting setup package is not completed, we will not be able to reimburse you immediately. Another friendly reminder, Bscc will only reimburse up to 95% of your grant. We will hold the other 5% retention amount until the final report is submitted. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, please note the red boxes. For each invoice submitted, you'll fill in your claim for reimbursement in the "this reporting period" state reimbursement. And then if you have any cash contributions for the project, you will enter those amounts in "this reporting period county cash contribution." Every invoice has the reporting period and its due date already populated for you. Okay, for invoice number 1, the reporting period is from June 10th, 2021 to August 31st, 2021. Every invoice must be submitted no later than its due date. And for invoice number 1, it's October 15th, 2021. This is circled in red here. And you must be submitting your claims whether you have any dollar amount or not. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the bottom portion of your invoice workbook. For each dollar amount that's entered as an expenditure in the upper portion that we saw earlier, please enter a detailed description with the associated costs in the section outlined in red above. Okay? Your expenditures should correlate to the project budget narrative, which is listed in its own tab. This is a green area, therefore you should be able to copy and paste from the project narrative tab. Next, there we go. This is a view of the project budget narrative and modifications tab that was just mentioned. Okay, please copy and paste your original project narrative details provided in your RFA into this tab. You can also copy and paste the comments section located in your budget table to support your expenses. If you are submitting a budget modification, those approved narrative updates will be added by Bscc staff in the yellow portion of this workbook tab. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the set in stone reporting periods. This is located within the Standard 213 Grant Agreement within Exhibit B. The grantee shall be paid quarterly in arrears by submitting an invoice that outlines actual expenditures claimed for the reporting period. All project expenditures and any county match contributions must be incurred by the end of the grant project period. That would be June 1st of 2024. And included on the final invoice due by July 15th of 2024. Project expenditures incurred after June 1st, 2024 will not be reimbursed. Let me repeat that. Project expenditures incurred after June 1st, 2024 will not be reimbursed. Grantee shall submit an invoice to the Bscc each invoicing period, even if grant funds are not expended or requested during the reporting period, no later than the respective due dates. Next slide, please. Grantees must maintain supporting documentation for all grant and county cash expenditures claimed on the invoices. All supporting documentation must be maintained by the grantee on site and be readily available for review by Bscc. Examples of supporting documentation can be receipts or invoices, work orders, contracts, just about anything. A friendly reminder, try to remember to label these documents when you receive them. Now, this is a quick outline to introduce you to the 3 main collections of information used in the invoice packet that you'll be submitting. The invoice packet is the results of you gathering supporting documentation, organizing it, and submitting to the Bscc for review with your live invoice workbook. The county will submit the invoice supporting documentation packet with each invoice that includes a grantee invoice supporting documentation checklist, the supporting documents that are labeled, and if necessary, the grantee salaries and benefits worksheet, and that's only if it's applicable. And I will describe each of these going forward. First, let's look at our invoice, the checklist, okay? Let's explore this, and from now on, I'm going to be just calling this the checklist. You will find this in the resource section on the home page. Excuse me. If you look to the left, you will see the same categories listed here from the invoices and your grant agreement budget table. The format here is a bit different from the invoices. You will only enter in the gray boxes, not the green areas. That's for Bscc. At the top of the checklist, you will note which invoice you are providing support and documentation for. You'll then complete the table as it relates to the invoice you listed at the top of the form. You will list the amount and support documents provided for each category here. Please don't forget to have the authorized financial officer sign and date approval at the bottom. The instructions on this slide are meant to give you guidance for the processes of labeling and organizing all your receipts for each reimbursable item listed on the grant invoice and the checklist. You will label all documents that you will be submitting with the budget line item and document number. So as an example, if you had an A&E invoice, you would label it number 2, architectural. And you can do it, handwritten labels are fine, but they must be legible. Only expenses that are incurred and paid for by the grantee during the grant cycle and before the end date of the applicable reporting period are eligible expenses. Repeat, this is very, very important. This means that the dates on all supporting documents must fall between the grant start date and the end date of the applicable reporting period. I'll repeat that one more time. This means the dates on all supporting documents must fall between the grant start date and the end date of the applicable reporting period for the invoice that you're submitting. Okay, next slide. Now, if you have salaries and benefits or like the one-time personnel costs that you want to use in your claim, you need only to fill out the grantee salaries and benefits worksheet. You'll find this sheet in the resource section of the homepage. You do not need to provide timesheets. Do continue to keep those timesheets on site, but do not send them to us. Next one. Now that you have most of your documents collected, labeled, and organized, this slide is another helpful insight into what documents might be used for many of the other categories. As an example, for more services and supplies, you can provide itemized receipts, customer invoices, supplier invoices, internet receipts. For things like professional services, you can use copies of invoices or work orders. It should be easy to identify the vendor's name, the form of payment, amount of item or service, total paid, dates of purchase, and description of items. That should all be on that document that you're using. If you discover that any invoice or work order does not provide sufficient detail, you may include a one-page statement that details the amount and how the expense meets requirement of the grant program. This will be best done in a Word document. Next slide. Okay. If you remember back on another slide, I gave you a very basic list of the 3 main sections of the invoice supporting documentation packet. The checklist cover page, the labeled organized supporting documents, and if applicable, the grantee salaries and benefits worksheet. Now we will describe how you're going to put all of that together. Once all supporting documents are labeled and accurately matched to the invoice, you must have the authorized financial officer sign off on that checklist. This checklist will be the cover page for the invoice packet. You will scan all of your supporting documentation in the order of the line items listed on the checklist, and then create a single PDF document for submission containing all the documents we just went over. Be sure to save the name and name the PDF with the grantee name, supporting docs for SB 823 invoice number, whatever. So for example, Los Angeles County supporting docs for SB 823 invoice number 3. That's just an example of how you would title that. You would submit that PDF with your live Excel invoice workbook to the email sb823grant@bscc.ca.gov. There's no spaces on that in any place. I know this has been an awful lot of information, and there are a lot of instructions that you'll probably didn't get quite when I went over them. Please refer back to your resource section, and there should be everything there, the instructions and all of your documents that you need. And please don't forget to look through the FAQs, because there's a lot of information in the FAQs as well. So we're done. How about question and answers?
Okay, we have a question from Laura Granados.
Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
So we're a part of a tri-county juvenile hall with our neighboring counties,
Mhm.
and we're all going to be paying parts of invoices.
Mhm.
How do you want us to identify these? We all have 3 separate grants, and so the one county is going to be giving all of us the documentation as, you know, we restructure our hall and our secure housing unit. So how do you want us to do this so that you understand that we're all paying a third of these invoices, but not even a third? We're paying 40, 40, and 20, I believe.
Okay. I'm familiar with what the group you're talking about. Go ahead and
Yeah.
when you're putting your handwritten labels on these documents that you want to use as support, make sure you put your county name and put the percentage that you're paying, and then we'll confirm the amount that you're putting down along with what the invoice is saying.
Okay, excellent.
Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, next question is from Emily Herrera.
Hi, good morning. I'm just slightly confused on some of the dates, and so I just was hoping to get some clarification. So on the workbook, you noted that there are a variance of dates for which we may request reimbursement for our invoices. So are those dates there for the invoices that we receive during those particular time periods? And what happens if we get an invoice that's close to the end of one of those dates, those time frames? Do we then submit it with the next tab or the next invoice date?
My understanding is yes, you'll be able to, because even when you receive them, you may not be paying them exactly on that date. So whenever you've paid them, that's a closer date that we want to see that you're reporting for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially we would still submit it even if it was towards the end of that invoice period. We would submit it with the next one, is what I'm hearing you say, because it was still paid. It just, you know, maybe we didn't get all the documentation, or the work wasn't finalized or something until the next period.
Yes, that's what I'm understanding that we can do with you. Please, if you have any questions like that before you submit it, please ask us.
Also, of note, because a lot of you counties are going to be submitting budget modification requests, and you're not going to have a grant agreement in place, some of you not until we get closer to that December deadline, you're not going to be able to request actual reimbursement until we have that in place and that grant agreement in place, because we can't pay you until we have that. So you are allowed to incur expenses, but when you submit your first invoice, that October invoice, it would show as a 0 request for reimbursement, because you can't request any reimbursement at that time. And then when you submit your invoice for the second reporting period, that's when you would submit those invoices that you already incurred and paid in the prior period, because at that point you'll have the grant agreement in place.
Okay. Next question is from Tiki Copeland.
Hi, good morning. This is Tiki Copeland from Riverside County Probation. Because there is so much information being provided, I was wondering, are you guys going to be providing this PowerPoint so we can go back to use as reference?
I believe we are. Can you confirm that, Ryan and Val?
Yes, the PowerPoint is already posted under the resources section, or actually above the resources section on the website. As always, we're always available for phone calls or emails, so don't hesitate to reach out to us, if you have questions concerning anything we talked about today, because I know it's a lot to take in at one time.
I'm here because I'm following you guys as you're speaking, so I'm here on the in the area on the website, and I see where it says grantee orientation. I just see agenda PDF. Is it there?
So that PDF file is the presentation that we're going through.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And I have one more question. This is coming from our fiscal officer. She would like to have examples of one-time costs, such as vehicles, furniture, implementation costs, things like clothing that initially to start inventory of clothing, maybe something that she wanted more of an example of those one-time costs.
Well, if you're going to have a one-time cost, like if you're going to buy a van, you would put that under the, there's a line item there for transportation, I believe. So you would put that there.
I see.
Another one-time cost would be someone coming in and doing training the trainees. You would put that under the one-time personnel costs.
Okay, got it.
No, so the training the trainee, so the costs incurred by your staff would go in the one-time personnel cost, but the paying the trainer that you have coming from some other agency or some other department would go under a separate line item, I believe. Have it pulled up right in front of me. Ryan, do you have that offhand? I know we talked about this just a little bit ago.
Yeah, it looks like line item number 7, training materials and supplies.
Correct. So that's where you would put the trainee or trainer that you would bring in that's not part of your staff. You would pay them out of that. Whereas the staff that you are having trained of your own staff would be paid out of the one-time.
Gotcha. You went on mute, John.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I don't know how much I cut off there. So the trainer that you have come in would be paid off the line item in the training piece that Ryan mentioned, and then the trainees that you have that are your staff that are getting trained would be in the one-time staffing cost section. That's where you put their maybe 8 hours or 4 hours or however long the training is for that.
Thank you, guys.
Nikki Mosinger, I saw your hand raised. Did you still have a question?
It's pretty specific. So back in the application, I remember something about $3,500 being like any expenditure over $3,500 needing to be approved by Bscc before purchasing. So I just wanted to make sure that's still the case.
Ryan, can you confirm that for her?
Yes, that's still the case. So basically everything that was included in the initial RFA has already been approved. And then when you guys submit your budget modification request, that's when we'll grant those approvals for those additional funds, you know, if they're over 3,500.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next one's from John Tran.
Thank you, Val. John Tran, County of Santa Clara Probation. I had a question regarding sort of the budget and budget modification piece, and you guys might have gone over that, but just for clarification. So we initially applied when we applied for the grant, our budget was $154,500, and when we received the notification, it said that it was increased to 306, and now it's 356. So just to confirm, do we just submit one budget modification for $356,000 at this point, and that's it, right? We don't need to submit a budget and a budget modification for that amount?
That's correct. Just one budget for that final updated amount.
Budget or budget modification?
Both. So we want
it would be both. Okay.
Modification request as well as, you know, kind of that budget table that everybody's familiar with.
Okay, and then once that's submitted, we'll be able to, once we submit it, once we submit that budget modification and budget for that new amount, then we will receive the grant agreement. Is that the understanding?
So the grant agreement, it's already posted under the resources section. So you guys can start reviewing the template. But yes, we'll need approval. You'll need approval from Bscc to basically enter into the standard grant agreement, which is the next step after submission of the budget mod as well as the budget table.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jan Rockwell, I saw your hand was raised. Did you still have a question?
No, I think I'll wait until you go over part B. Thank you.
Okay. And then Laura Granados again.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarity, and maybe because Jen is my counterpart over there. So with regard to the payment of the state grant funds and the application, it said that we would be paid one lump sum. Are you going to be going over that in a minute?
We updated the one lump sum to quarterly billing cycles.
Okay, so grantees will be paid in one lump sum, but then we have to submit quarterly invoices to document how the money was spent?
No, so right now the quarterly invoice period, so there's 12 total. And so we would basically issue 12 payments to the counties during that 3-year period.
Okay.
So you can ignore the lump sum payment because we changed that.
You did. Okay, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
If a county does expend all their funds in one quarter invoice period, then it would be paid in one lump sum, except for that 5% retention that would be held until all the documentation is received from the county. So it is still possible to have a one lump sum, but we're trying to make sure that we can get funding out to counties a little faster. So we're doing the quarterly invoicing so that you don't have to hold on to invoices or additional funds waiting for the reimbursement.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for this portion of Q&A. If we didn't get to your question, we'll have one more Q&A at the end, okay? Okay, Lindsay, it's your turn.
Thank you, Val. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay. In this section, I will cover the next 13 slides related to the SB 823 Administrative and Programmatic Responsibilities. Next, please. So these topics we'll cover here are standard agreements, which is the contract, the Board of Supervisor resolution, the Bscc grant administration guide, any prior approvals, and finally the reporting requirements. And also, as Sharon mentioned before, we will need a list of documents from the counties before we can proceed to set up an invoice account. And then we're going to cover the slides of those documents as well. So documents needed are the government TIN form, the standard 213 agreement, which is part of the standard grant agreement, the W-9, and the Board of Supervisor resolution. So these documents can also be found and posted on the resource section on our website. So this slide here shows the first page of the SB 823 standard grant agreement, typically referred to as the State Form STD 213. Sharon and I will work with you regarding these steps as we process the paperwork that you're going to submit in order for the county to begin seeking reimbursement. So at this time, I just want the county to make sure that the top portion of the standard 213 that is circled in red over there on the top of the screen, that will be unique to each county. Like Val can just circle that so the counties can see. So for example, you will have the county name in front of 823, and then it's part A or part B. So for example, if it's Fresno County, then it will be Fresno, the number 823, and then part A or part B with no spaces. And this form will be posted in the resource section on our website as well. And in the next few slides, we're going to cover the additional documentation that we'll need from the county. There's an additional form called the government TIN form, which we'll need from the county as well. Next, please. So this is a screenshot of the government tax ID number form that you will need to submit to the Bscc. And please note that even though in the top of the header, there is contact information to Fiscal, please do not email or send that form to Fiscal. Please email this form back to the Bscc after it is completed. Thank you. Next, please. So right here, we have an example of the W-9 form that the county will also need to provide in that list of documentation back to the Bscc. What you see in the slide is actually a 2014 version, but feel free to use any newer version as long as the signature is dated within the last 6 months. Next, please. So right now we will moving on to Exhibit 8. In the standard grant agreement, this will cover the scope of work, project summary, project officials, reporting requirements, project records, and the conflict of interest. Next, please, Belle. So in this slide, it kind of covers the rest of the exhibits in the standard agreement. And before I move on, please, I just want to mention, please know that there is a budget summary table that the counties will need to fill out within that standard grant agreement. Any budget modification will need to be reviewed and approved by the Bscc before we can proceed and execute the agreement. And also all the budget modification requests must be submitted before the December 10, 2021 date. So it's this year. And if any county wants to be reimbursed for expenditures by the end of the first invoice period, they must complete and submit the budget modification form back to us well before the December 10, 2021 date to allow sufficient time for staff here at the BSC to review and set up the invoice account for you. So once the counties get approval on the budget modification, we can then work on entering into the agreement and then begin the process and allow the county to submit invoices. So what I'm gonna have Val do is just to bring up the grant agreement on the screen real quick so the counties can get a visual of what the grant agreement looks like. So if Val, you can please scroll through the documents, each page so the county can see what that will look like when they go to the resource section and they will be able to identify the form. Okay, keep going. So we'll go through the exhibits and here are the requirements. There's the budget summary table that you'll need to fill out and just keep going. Go to Exhibit C, keep going. And then just here's the rest of the exhibits. So this will be posted and should already be in the resource section. So feel free to visit that section for any documentations that you need. And also you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. So exhibit, sorry, can you go back, Val, please? Go back to the slide. There you go. So Exhibit B will cover budget detail and payment provisions. Exhibit C covers the general terms and conditions, such as maintain records for 3 years for audit purposes. And Exhibit D has the special terms and condition rules governing the subcontractors and project access. Okay, next slide, please. And also, we want to remind the county to please do not forget to submit your Board of Supervisor resolution. The Bscc will definitely need this on file before we can enter and execute the grant contract agreement. And also, please note that we have removed the language concerning matching funds as it is no longer required for this grant. Next, please. So in this slide, here's a slide that provides a link to the Bscc Grant Administration Guide that is intended to help grantees comply with the general terms and conditions of the project. Feel free to access the guide from the CPGP page at that link below. You can always go back and revisit the slide if needed. So right here, request prior approval for budget modification incentives. Please note that gift cards not only need to be purchased within the grant period, but they must also be dispersed before June 1st, 2024. Please refer to the SB 823 homepage, and there should be 2 attachments titled the Provider Justification for Participant and Program Incentives Word document, and the second one is called the Provider Incentives Inventory and Log Excel spreadsheet. And they're both listed under the resource section as well, so feel free to visit that section for any additional information. Next, please. So over here, I will cover request prior approval for the applicants that are planning to use the YPFG funds for infrastructure or improvement to local facility covered by Title 15, including juvenile halls and probation camps. Counties must ensure that the funded project observe the programming requirements that are included in the facility standards. So please work with our CFC field representative Tanya or Michael on this. And any new or amended agreement or contract the county will enter into within their SB 81 finance facility must obtain prior consent from the Bscc, CDCR, and the State Public Works Board prior to execution. Next, please. Additional SB 81 facility sublease requirement. Please reach out to your CDCR analyst, Amina, and her supervisor, Valerie, to inform them of your intent to spend SB 823 grant funds within your completed SB 81 facility. Per the facility sublease, the county will need to obtain approval and consent from, again, the State Public Works Board, CDCR, and Bscc before moving forward with executing your installation contract and maintenance agreement. So among other things within the maintenance agreement, the SPWB will be looking for a termination for convenience clause with notice of 50 days or less in subordination language. Once you have CDCR approval to begin the process of obtaining state approval and consent, which would include details of the specific items and location of the upgrades being installed, please work with our CFC field representative, Tanya and Michael, to ensure that your upgrades are compliant with Title 15 and Title 24. Before the county can move forward with the execution of the installation contract, Title 15 and Title 24 approval must be obtained along with approval from, again, CDCR and the Bscc and the State Public Works Board to perform the work. Once you have a draft of your maintenance agreement, please forward that to CDCR so we can begin obtaining the proper consent needed from, again, CDCR, Bscc, and the State Public Works Board. Now, after receiving the proper consent from CDCR, Bscc, and the State Public Works Board, the county may enter into the maintenance agreement. Next, please. Okay, so this is a list of the reporting requirements that are needed for the Bscc to release that final 5% retention to the county. So by July 31st, 2024, each county, each grantee that receives a grant from the Youth Programs and Facility Grant Program must submit a detailed report to the BSCC with the following information. Number 1, a full accounting of expenditure. Number 2, a detailed description of the physical and system enhancements that are made. Number 3, how many regional placement beds were supported with the funding. And then number 4, what proportion of the regional placement beds were contracted to other counties and which counties. So this slide marks the end of our presentation. We will now take questions from the counties first, and then we will move on to any public comments. Thank you.
Okay, the first question is from Maria McKee.
I wanted to go back to the one-time costs and how those would be accounted for. I think you described that if we're training staff, staff time can be charged as a one-time staffing cost. In that circumstance, would that be when we would be including salaries and fringe documentation in our supporting documentation?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Dan Luttrell.
Good morning, Dan Luttrell from Kings County Probation. Did I understand correctly that we will still have ongoing reporting requirements once we've completed our project?
There's a list of reporting requirements to close out the project, which Lindsay just went over. Once you have completed those and you received your 5% retention, you no longer have to do any additional reporting or invoicing. So if for some reason you've used up all the funds except for the 5%, and it's taking some time to get those reporting questions back and additional documentation to justify all the costs that were incurred, then you may have invoices that are $0 invoices up until we receive those documentation, and then once that's done, again, we'll release the 5% retention, and then you no longer have to submit invoices after that.
Thanks.
Next question is from Michelle Knight.
Hi, I know you spoke about some one-time costs. We had about 3 or 4 examples, but are there other that
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I don't know if it's just me, but I couldn't hear the question there. If you would like to submit that question via writing, we'll get back to you on that. Sorry.
construction costs or other types of, I know we talked about vehicle, we talked about some other ideas, but are there some others that you can include, please? I'm asking if it's, okay, thanks.
I think I heard the gist of the question. So for additional one-time costs, there are quite a few. Most of this program is situated for one-time costs. So if you need to buy training materials, need to buy desks or something such as that for the programs, you can do so. You can purchase additional training materials. You can purchase there are options to purchase gift cards for incentives. However, there are additional requirements, which Lindsay went over as well. So there are many different things that can be listed for one-time costs, and they are listed out in the RFA as well. Not specific each item, but generally, again, you're going to submit that budget modification request to us, and you want to list those items, and we will look at those and give approvals as long as it meets the requirement of the project. And again, if I didn't fully answer your question, I know we're here breaking up there, so definitely submit that to us, and we will get you an answer out and also post that answer on the FAQ so everybody else can hear it as well.
All right, next question is from Danielle Falkema.
Hi, I have a question about the match funds. So they're no longer a requirement of the grant, but our original application included quite a bit of match funds. And then as funds became available, we had less and less match because we were now paying for those items with grant funds. So will we be locked into the original amount of match funds that we submitted with our original application?
No, you're not locked in. There is no match requirement for this project. The match piece was listed merely so that we could understand what the project entailed. So, you know, if you're buying, you know, if you were a small county at the original RFA and you were purchasing a van, it would cost over the $47,000 that you originally awarded. So we wanted to make sure that there was going to be additional funds that were going to go into that to make those purchases. So you're not locked into those because there are no match requirements, but you can still include them in your budget so that we can make sure that the costs are there. But there's no requirement that we see what those match funds are or documentation of them. It's more for illustration purposes so that we know what all is going into the projects.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, next question is from Cheryl Taylor.
Hi, basic question, just wondering if you could confirm that the Board of Supervisors resolution is due alongside revised budgets in December?
Yes, it is due. We would like to have it sooner, of course, but it would be required in order to enter into the grant agreement in order to issue payment.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Do we have any questions or comments from the public? Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands here. If you guys do have any questions, I have the email up on the share screen here, the SB 823 grant at bscc.ca.gov, and there will be a FAQ posted as well.
All right, thank you very much for everybody for coming out and getting into this presentation. Again, this recording will be posted on the website as well, along with all the other documentation that we talked about today. Also, you will be receiving contact information from your assigned field rep for these programs within the next day or so as well. Now, they do have a lot, so they are going to be sending them out over time. So if you have any questions, definitely go ahead and submit them to the grant email that we have listed here, or once you have your contact from your assigned field rep, you can always go through them as well. And I appreciate it. And any other questions, again, will be posted to the FAQs page as we receive them. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.